The Senate and House Ag Committees are busy working on the next Farm Bill, which will cover commodities, specialty crops, livestock, and more. This legislation will impact every farmer, rancher, and rural business for the next 5 years. Make sure you don't miss insights and analytics that only Agri-Pulse and its top-notch team of well-connected experts can provide. Register today for a free trial at agripulse.com and click the subscribe button, or email us at pam@agri-pulse.com. You don't want to miss this Farm Bill coverage.
Welcome back to another episode of Meet the Farmhand. We are joined this week with Lesly Weber McNitt, who is with the Eleanor Crook Foundation. And Lesly, thank you so much for joining us today. So to kick off the interview, let's just go back to the beginning. You're a Pennsylvania native, and you came out to D.C. to attend college, George Washington University. So I'm curious, what made you want to stay in the district after you graduated?
Well, first, thanks so much for inviting me to, have this conversation with you today, Hannah. It was in prepping for this conversation. It was a fun walk down memory lane to kind of think about some of these things and how I ended up here in Washington, D.C. for 22 years now. I came to Washington, D.C. At 18 to go to the George Washington University. I majored in international affairs at the Elliott School and had a concentration in international politics. So I've really always been interested in what makes other people tick, what makes other cultures tick, and understanding where we in the United States fit into the broader world and our relations with people in other countries. And so that was what I focused on at school. You know, I was hoping to be the youngest ever Secretary of State. It didn't pan out that way. And I wasn't quite sure what exactly I was going to do when I graduated. But I knew I wanted to do something that helped other people, particularly in marginalized communities around the world. And, that was really my goal. And my career has taken a few different directions, but that's always been my North Star.
So you didn't have a agriculture background coming to DC. What made you tap into this industry and focus on it for a majority of your career?
That's a great question. Yes, I did not grow up on a farm. I always say I'm a city girl who loves agriculture. And I hope and I believe that it's really important for people from all different backgrounds to be involved in the food and agriculture industry because we're important translators. And the reality is, food production and our food systems impact all of us. And so I started out my career at a government relations firm, really learning how things work in Washington, how advocacy works, how our budget cycle works, and just understanding the federal government better. It wasn't until about 5 years into my career where I had the opportunity to help Farm Journal launch its Farm Journal Foundation. And what was so compelling about that opportunity to me is that over the years, I just, started to realize that food and agriculture, it's a common bond that we all share no matter where you live or where you are. It's deeply personal, and it's often at the crux of so much of our, international dealings with other people, other nations, and other cultures. And I had studied a bit about, global food and ag issues, particularly the debate around biotech, different, trade disputes over the years when I was in school. And also recognize that global food security is critically important everywhere, and that was where my interest really started to develop, and that's why the opportunity to go work at Farm Journal Foundation and its food security mission and agricultural development mission was a really compelling foray for me into the food and agriculture space. And once I started working with farmers and started learning the issues in a deeper way, it was just it just became part of who I was, and it was, in my blood from that minute forward.
Tell me a little bit more about how you went about the learning process. You mentioned agriculture, is related to food security. But when we look at the agriculture industry, sometimes people can get tripped up with the amount of acronyms we have and stuff like that. So how did you really hone in on these key issues? Was it mainly just talking with people, or how did you go about learning?
I mean, it was definitely a point of insecurity for me in those early years that, I didn't grow up on a farm, and I was suddenly surrounded by so many people who had really deep roots in agriculture. What I was really, really fortunate to experience was being part of the Farm Journal family, and those deep roots from the experts within Farm Journal, and then that broader network of relationships, right, with farmers, with organizations like Agri-Pulse. I mean, you know, getting to know Sarah and Al over the years, but a lot of people within the agriculture community and the agriculture policy community, those relationships and the credibility and the expertise when it comes to what farmers really care about and all the different aspects of our food and ag system. I mean, I was able to learn so much through osmosis and by asking stupid questions, by going to events, by talking to people with expertise, and just doing a lot of reading. And I mean, I remember sitting in a meeting and Googling, you know, like different farm equipment terms just to figure out what everything was and how the component pieces came together, reading reports. And it was a lot of hard work and asking a lot of questions, but I was very fortunate to have a ton of, you know, resources at my disposal. Sometimes it's just about putting yourself out there and being willing to admit what you don't know and continuing to figure out what you need to know.
So before your current role, you were on Capitol Hill and you were working for Ranking Member David Scott on the House Ag Committee. When you left that position in May of 2023, it was, you know, in the middle of a Farm Bill year. But we're still in the middle of a Farm Bill year. So what advice do you have for the staffers who are still working on the legislation and piecing together the next Farm Bill?
Well, first I want to say hi to all my old colleagues on the House and Senate Agriculture Committee. They're wonderful. They're so hardworking, so intelligent, and I know they're all really, really committed to getting a Farm Bill done and getting a high quality Farm Bill done. The best advice that I can offer them is to keep the lines of communication open with each other and to, you know, facilitate that communication as much as possible among the members and the leadership of the committee. The politics are challenging these days when it comes to getting anything done. And the Farm Bill has long been, you know, one of those like must-do, widely known, bipartisan pieces of legislation that really takes all hands on deck. And I still think there's really a broad commitment to a good final product. Just think it's really important that everyone approaches this from a really like problem-solving mindset as opposed to trying to come up with almost creative and transformational shifts, because I just don't know that the policy environment is conducive to that.
Mm-hmm. So focusing on your time at USDA underneath the Obama administration, you were the Chief of Staff for the Farm and Foreign Agricultural Service. In this role, what would you say was a lesson that you learned that has really stuck with you today?
I learned so many different lessons during my time at USDA. It was an incredible experience. The mission area, formerly known as Farm and Foreign Agriculture Services, was comprised of, it's now been reorganized, but it was comprised of the Foreign Agriculture Service, the Farm Service Agency, and the Risk Management Agency. And so I had a really broad and varied experience of the different things that would come across my desk every single day. I think the lessons that I took away that were the most profound for me almost had to do more with how you do things, how you approach issues and program implementation, and how you get things done, and how you conduct yourself in an institution that is that large and that layered, really learning how you get things done in a bureaucracy and mastering process. And I think one of the other really big takeaways that came from that experience is that people are policy. And the policy issues of the day may come and go. Sometimes they come back, as we all know in agriculture. But thinking about who is in the room and who has a seat at the table and what voices and perspectives are needed to ensure that an agency that big can make policy for all of us is a really important consideration. And I learned what an important power and component that was of policy making and decision making.
So in previous Meet the Farmhand interviews, we've had people talk about their experience working for Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack when he was Secretary first time around. So From your experience working with him, what are some lessons that he taught you that have stuck with you?
Secretary Vilsack he was a great person to learn from, and I've seen a lot of different leaders in the agriculture space who have had the privilege of working for him model themselves or different aspects of their leadership style after his. He has such a command over the issues, and he's always very prepared. He prepares rigorously. He organizes his thoughts in a way that is, I think, aspirational for a lot of us who have been able to kind of watch him in action, both behind the scenes and then, in a public setting. And so that preparation and that just thorough understanding of the issues and the players is something that I took away from my time working with him.
You mentioned that there are people in the industry who have modeled, their leadership style after Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack. Would you say that you have also tried modeling your leadership style after him, and if so, in like what ways?
I think that, Staffing Secretary Vilsack, it required a lot of us to meet his standard. He treated his staff with inclusivity and respect. But he had high standards for himself, and I think that because he's so smart and he covers so much ground just based on the vast jurisdiction that USDA has, and his vast experience, you didn't want to disappoint him. You didn't want to let the department down, right? There's just a lot of reason to really want to rise to your best self and to your best standard. And so I think, because he prepared as intensively as he did, and he had such a deep knowledge of the issues, it was incumbent on staff to do the same, to be able to advise him and to be able to position him and the department to really deliver on its mandate. I think something else that he did really well, just kind of going back to your earlier question about lessons that I learned from Secretary Vilsack, are when you think about how the federal government operates, each cabinet member is representing their agency not only externally and within the agency, but they're also advocating within the cabinet and within the interagency. And I think he did a really nice job building relationships with his counterparts, and also with building that credibility that really enabled the Agriculture Department to, advocate for itself and advocate for the constituency that it serves within the rest of the administration. I think he's done that again in the Biden administration.
So after USDA, you then went on to the National Corn Growers Association, and you have a pretty unique perspective since you've worked on Capitol Hill, you've worked in the administration, and then you've also taken part in an association, trade association. So can you talk a little bit more about how work is different at each of those different entities and how they kind of are similar in their own way or different?
That's a great question, Hannah. And I have really made the effort to try and get different types of experience in different types of organizations over the years, because I find how organizations work really fascinating. And I think getting that those different perspectives has been really helpful to me in my career. And I definitely encourage, other young professionals to try different things and get those different perspectives. And then you look back on what you did in a previous job and say, if I only knew then what I do now, I would have been, even more effective, right? And my time working for the National Corn Growers Association was fantastic. I think that I always love working directly with farmers. It was really helpful to understand how the government worked, then in being an advocate and helping our grower members understand the different opportunities for them to weigh in and make their voices heard, understand how, policy making and decision making processes were being teed up and what we could expect, those types of things. But I also loved the opportunity to work for, a grassroots membership and make sure that the farmer voice was at the table and that they were positioned to be as effective they could be in arriving at policy outcomes and achieving policy outcomes that, would benefit the farmers, benefit their families and their communities.
Mm-hmm. in your current role here at Eleanor Crook Foundation, it says on your portfolio that you work on a broad portfolio of global food security and trade. How would you say those became the two main focus areas in your career, and how did you build up your experience around those two areas?
Sure. So over the years, the issues that I have gravitated toward and I have really emphasized have been the global food and agriculture issues. And as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, helping marginalized communities around the world and figuring out how to ensure that people could reach their full potential and improve their quality of life is something that really motivates me. And I've always wanted to figure out, because I believe that food and agriculture and nutrition are transformative and really catalysts in helping improve people's quality of life and providing opportunities. So figuring out different ways to contribute in that way has always been a goal of mine at each step of my career. And I really believe that nutrition, food security, development, and trade are all sort of part of the same continuum, even though they, each one has a sort of different role to play in that continuum. And so that's sort of the way that I have seen my experiences and all of these issues that I've worked on working together. Coming to Eleanor Crook Foundation has been a wonderful opportunity because this is the deepest when it comes to global malnutrition that I have gone in my career. And I've found that the work on agriculture and our food systems is a really important component, and now I'm also learning more and getting to advocate more on the global health side of things. And nutrition really sits right at that intersection of health and of food. And so it's fun to be able to learn new things and also to be able to contribute some different angle and perspective on what we're doing. Our foundation's dedicated to ending global malnutrition. We focus in particular on children that are really severely malnourished. I mean, we're talking about the tip of the spear, really the most acute hunger and food insecurity out there in the world. And one of the, we really are focused on what's the best return on investment for prevention and treatment interventions when it comes to malnutrition. What's really going to move the needle the most cost effectively and the most, efficiently. And one of the things that we have really been promoting in that we've seen sort of a transformative progress in is the use of ready-to-use therapeutic foods. And I mention this because ready-to-use therapeutic foods are, it's essentially, a pouch that is administered to children who are suffering from wasting. Their bodies are so deprived of nutrients that they're literally consuming themselves in these cases. Ready-to-use therapeutic foods are administered to these kids. It's also known as Plumpy Nut or RUTF, and they're produced with American peanuts and milk powder and vegetable oil or soybean oil and sugar and then other vitamins and micronutrients. And we've found such great support from the U.S. agriculture community, from farmers who see their commodities going to save children's lives around the world. And so I just think that's a really good illustration of how these different communities and these different issues intersect and how we are truly, we're one world and we're all interconnected. And so I get to bring that my agriculture friends in that community and that knowledge into the work that I'm doing here at ECF every single day. And it's been incredibly rewarding.
Mm-hmm. And who are you targeting with these initiatives? Are you meeting with people on Capitol Hill? Are you asking for their support? Or are you trying to get more American producers' products out on the global market? Can you kind of just explain the cycle there?
Sure. So at Eleanor Crook Foundation, we invest in research and policy and advocacy to really elevate leadership and commitment to ending malnutrition. And what we're working to do is to, one, educate policymakers and decision makers on why malnutrition is, it's still a really devastating, widespread issue that we unfortunately, I don't think we've done enough over the years to move the needle Now it's important to take a step back and say, as a world, as a global community, we've cut hunger and poverty in half in the last 30 years. So, we can do really big things when we commit the resources and the energy to them. And it's really about shifting our energy to focus a little bit more on malnutrition. And then the hopeful side of this, really devastating public health crisis is that it is an achievable and solvable crisis. And so if we do shift energy and focus and resources to the tools that we know can work, can move the needle, we can live in a world where kids no longer die from malnutrition and starvation. And so it's also to really help show people the possibility and the tools. We work with policymakers, and we also then work with many partners on research about how to better deliver interventions that can reduce global malnutrition. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, if you will, to trying to figure out how we can keep improving on the model here and really move the needle farther, faster.
So throughout your career, what would you say has been your proudest moment?
Certainly working at USDA in the Obama administration, and some of the things I was able to do in that role was a big point of pride for me. And it was a big challenge, to come into USDA and think, this is outside of my comfort zone. I don't know how I'm going to learn this. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then figuring out how to be effective in those roles was a big accomplishment. And there have been key milestones along each stop, and I do try and every now and then remind myself of that, because it's easy to get bogged down in the daily grind of trying to chip away and make progress on issues slowly over the years. And then every now and then there are those moments, like getting a job at USDA, or like another one was when the US-Mexico-Canada agreement passed when I was at Corn Growers. I mean, that was one of the biggest things that I worked on when I was there. And it was such a critical outcome for the corn farmers, because Mexico is such a big export market, and Canada's a critical partner as well. So those are some things that just really stand out in my memory. Passing the Global Food Security Act, I mean, that wasn't my accomplishment alone. I was one tiny player, but advocating for that. And, those are some things that stand out in my memories, things I worked on that I'm really, really proud of.
Mm-hmm. So we've gotten to know Lesly a lot in her career, but let's get to know you outside of work. Just tell me a little bit more about your family.
So my immediate family is obviously based here in DC. My husband Dave and I have been married since 2012. We have a almost 6-year-old daughter, Aria, a cat, Dawkins. And then I'm really lucky that both sides of our family aren't too far away. All the grandparents are in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. And then I've got a sister and a niece there as well. And then my other sister lives here in DC, so she's close by. And that's the fam.
All right. And what do you like to do outside of work, hobbies? Tell me a little bit more about how you like to spend your spare time.
Well, as I mentioned, I have an almost 6-year-old daughter. So she takes up most of my spare time, but we love doing things with her. My husband and I are big travelers. That's a big passion of ours. And our daughter is a budding adventurer. And so we've been, now that she's a little bit older and it's a little bit easier to travel with her, we've been doing more of that, and she's really into it as well. I like to read. I like to get together with friends, and loved hiking, wine tasting, things like that. But for the most part, it's work and keeping a kid alive take up a lot of my time.
So for the traveling aspect, has your daughter mentioned places that she wants to travel to next, or do you guys have a trip coming up that's on the horizon, or?
We were recently in Puerto Rico over the holidays, and she loves the beach and the pool. A big one for her, it was to go to Paris, and we checked that off her bucket list in August. She really wanted to go to France and see the Eiffel Tower. And now she's talking about Costa Rica. So I don't know where that's going to fit in, or what we have next on the the travel agenda rather. But she's talking about Costa Rica. So you'll have to stay tuned.
All right. So before we wrap up our interview, we always like to end the segment on this note, and you kind of alluded to it earlier in your answers, but if you could go back to day one of your career, knowing everything you know now, what would you tell young Lesly?
I would tell young Lesly what I tell a lot of young women who I come across in our field, which is you deserve to be here. You have a lot to contribute. As long as you work hard and you know your stuff and you back it up, you deserve to have a seat at the table. And I would also tell young Lesly to seek out mentors. Mentors every step of the way in my career and in my life have been invaluable. Seek out mentors of all different ages, including your peers. You have a lot to learn, and then pay it forward. You have a lot to offer other people, and it's important that we help other young rising stars who are committed to making a positive change in the world. We help them figure out their path forward, just like our mentors have done for us.
Well, Lesly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Hannah.